Almost all major events during the Cultural Revolution were related to internal references, and some were even triggered by internal references. Reading various internal references is an important way for Mao Zedong to understand the process and details of the Cultural Revolution and make major decisions. Mao Zedong read and commented on more than 30 kinds of internal references during the Cultural Revolution. Internal reference, as well as private letters. Mao Zedong's internal reference instructions, almost all of them have their own characteristics, and all of them reflect his thoughts and strategies on governing the country. They are an important part of Mao Zedong thought and an important aspect of studying the formation process of Mao Zedong thought. 1. Mao Zedong's leadership ability to control the situation is unparalleled. The methods of controlling the situation are diverse, and the sources of information are extensive and diverse. For an unprecedented movement like the Cultural Revolution, in addition to various meetings, daily work, and routine reports, reading various internal references was an important way for Mao Zedong to understand the process and details of the Cultural Revolution and make major decisions. According to Mao Zedong's chronicle and Mao Zedong's manuscripts since the founding of the People's Republic of China, from November 1965 to September 8, 1976, there are more than 30 types of internal references that Mao Zedong read and commented on. 1. Compendium of Situation of Guangming Daily. 2. Briefing of Reporters of Wenhui Daily. 3. Summary of Documents and Telegraphs of the Central Office's Confidential Office. 4. Briefing of Situation of the Education Office of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. 5. The Situation Report of the Central Office Confidential Office. 6. Situation Briefing of the Foreign Affairs Office of the State Council. 7. Xinhua News Agency Telegraph Draft. 8. Central Cultural Revolution Group Offices Express. 9. Military Cultural Revolution Group Situation Summary. 10. Central Cultural Revolution Working Group Report on Important Events. 11. Xinhua News Agency Internal Reference. 12. Central Cultural Revolution Working Group Express. 13. Central Cultural Revolution Working Group Cultural Revolution Briefing. 14. Central Cultural Revolution Group Working Group Telegram Express. 15. Xinhua News Agency Reference News. 16. Letters and Calls Office of the Secretariat of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China Cultural Revolution Letters and Visits Briefing. 17. Secretariat of the Central Office of the Communist Party of China Letters and Visits. Office Excerpts from Letters. 18. General Office of the Central Military Commission Excerpts from Letters from the Masses. 19. Liberation Army Daily Chief Editor's Office Military Daily Life. 20. Briefings of the Central International Liaison Department. 21. Xinhua News Agency Cultural Revolution Trends. 22. Central Military Commission General Office Excerpts from Letters and Visits. 23. People's Daily Cultural Revolution Situation Compilation. 24. Central Military Commission General Office Internal Situation. 25. Excerpts from People's Letters. 26. Briefing of Foreign Affairs Activities of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. 27. Briefing of Sino-Soviet Border Negotiations. 28. Summary of the Hebei Provincial Criticism and Rectification Conference by the Revolutionary Committee of Hebei Province Briefing. 29. Excerpt of letters from the Letters and Visits Office of the Central Office. 30. Summary of letters from the Letters and Visits Office of the Central Office. 31. Political Work Briefing from the Political Work Group of the Department of Philosophy and Social Sciences of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. 32. Summary of letters from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs News Situation. 33. Xinhua News Agency Domestic Dynamic Proof. 34. Xinhua News Agency Reference Materials. 35. Army Cultural Revolution Group Army Cultural Revolution Movement Situation Report. 36. Secretary of the Foreign Affairs Office of the State Council Group Briefing on foreign-related issues during the Cultural Revolution. The 36 kinds of internal references listed above are not necessarily all the internal references Mao Zedong had seen, and some internal references may not be made public at the moment due to the content of the instructions, so such internal references have not been made public for the time being. The alternative newspaper Reference News, which is now publicly issued, was all internal information at the time, and cotters not at a certain level could not subscribe. It was not until the early 1970s that Reference News was relaxed enough to allow section-level cotters to subscribe, and ordinary people still could not see it. According to public information, some Mao Zedong read more about the above internal references and gave more instructions, some Mao Zedong read less and gave few instructions. This situation not only reflects Mao Zedong's work interest, but also shows Mao Zedong's work focus. However, seeing less does not mean that it is not important. Some internal reference Mao Zedong may not see much in normal times, but his instructions are like thunder, enough to blow a 12-level typhoon in the political arena. Therefore, viewed from a certain angle, the content of the instructions also reveals Mao Zedong's ruling mentality and personnel judgments, and reflects political trends and domestic trends. The complex thoughts of this historical giant are revealed in it more authentically and vividly. 2. On June 10, 1966, Mao Zedong met with Ho Chi Minh, chairman of the Vietnamese Labor Party in Hangzhou, and talked about the source of the Cultural Revolution. Our latest struggle began in November last year, in more than 7 months. At first, Yao Wen launched an attack. He was a young man, discussing the issue of clean officials. Now we don't deal with the issue of clean and corrupt officials. The press. The Yao Wen launch an attack and discussion on the issue of honest officials that Mao Zedong mentioned here refer to Yao Wen's long article comment on the newly edited historical drama Hai Rui Dismissed from Office published by Shanghai Wenwei Po on November 10, 1965. The whole country caused a strong shock. Thus, the Cultural Revolution kicked off. A few days after the publication of Yao Wen, Mao Zedong read the internal references such as issue 362 of the Compendium of Situations compiled and printed by the editor-in-chief of Guangming Daily on November 15, and learned about the situation after the publication of Yao Wen's article. I have read it. I have not slept all night. Send Zhang Qing to read all these. After reading it, I will send someone to Hangzhou. It can make Mao Zedong sleepless all night, which shows how important this matter is in Mao Zedong's heart. Mao Zedong approved these materials to Zhang Qing, which showed his trust in Zhang Qing, and at the same time granted Zhang Qing the authority on this issue. For example, on February 5, 1966, in Buchanan, Mao Zedong saw 7 materials submitted by Peng Zhen on February 1 concerning the issue of Hai Rui dismissed from office, and commented, Zhang Qing, after reading these materials, temporarily store them in your place. In early April of the same year, Mao Zedong read the 475th issue of Compendium of Situations compiled and printed by the editor-in-chief of Guangming Daily on March 31, and commented, I have read it, and withdraw Comrade Zhang Qing. He also read the Wenwei Po submitted by Zhang Qing. The reporter's bulletin compiled and printed by the Beijing office stated, I have read it. Retire Zhang Qing. These internal references were submitted directly to Mao Zedong by Zhang Qing, and the content reflected some trends in the intellectual circles on the issue of Hai Rui dismissed from office. What needs to be pointed out here is that, judging from the current public documents, in the face of the upcoming political storm, Mao Zedong's thoughts were profound and tortuous, detailed and complicated. On January 29, 1966, Mao Zedong replied to Zhou Shizao, I have received dozens of books and poems from the attached masterpieces, and I am very happy. I am very sorry for not replying early due to busyness and mainly laziness. It seems that your interest is still strong, and I have declined a lot. How about it? What about it? Mao Zedong and Zhou Shizao were friends in the early years, and their friendship continued for decades, so Mao Zedong could open up his heart in front of Zhou Shizao, and some emotions that had been suppressed for a long time were released. Can vent out. Mao Zedong seldom expressed such emotional words as the letter said, I have declined a lot, how is this, etc. in his life. The question is, what does it reveal about Mao Zedong's thoughts at this time? On February 24 of the same year, when writing an inscription to Luo Liwa, an attendant in the Great Hall of the People, Mao Zedong wrote, we must use the method of criticism and self-criticism to analyze ourselves and deal with the contradictions among the people. In the future, the possible problems and their solutions and thinking on the path. However, subsequent events proved that the problems caused by the Cultural Revolution were far more complicated than Mao Zedong imagined at this time, and many problems went beyond the scope of contradictions among the people. The internal reference instructions show that Mao Zedong's understanding of the Cultural Revolution is gradually becoming clearer. Initially, the top leaders of the central government called this movement a cultural revolution. Mao Zedong proposed in July 1964 to set up a central cultural revolution group of 5 consisting of Peng Zhen, Lu Ding'ai, Zhou Yang, and Wu Lengzi. During the meeting of the Central Secretariat from April 9 to 12, 1966, the 5-member group of the Central Cultural Revolution was frozen, and another group was established with Chen Boda as the leader, Zhang Qing and Lu Zijian as the deputy leaders, Kang Sheng as the consultant, and another 9 members. Cultural Revolution Document Drafting Group. This is the first version of the later famous Central Cultural Revolution Group. On April 23 of the same year, Mao Zedong issued an instruction on an internal reference in the General Office of the Central Committee. This is a good document, please send it to all comrades. University teachers and students, middle school teachers and high school students in all regions should participate in the Cultural Revolution movement. The Cultural Revolution designed by Mao Zedong at this time was only limited to the range of students above high school in the field of education. It had not yet been imagined that it would be a big cultural revolution, and elementary school students would be involved. On May 16 of the same year, an enlarged meeting of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee was held in Beijing. The meeting formally decided to abolish the Cultural Revolution Group of 5 and its offices, and re-establish the Cultural Revolution Group under the Politburo Standing Committee. The May 16 notice passed and released at the meeting marked the full spread of the Cultural Revolution. However, the notice still talks about holding high the banner of the proletarian cultural revolution. The real highlight and emphasis on Big May have originated from the People's Daily editorial The Great Revolution that touched people's souls on June 2 of the same year. Since then, the Cultural Revolution has evolved into the Cultural Revolution. On June 6 of the same year, the People's Daily reprinted the same day's Liberation Army Daily article Hold High the Great Red Banner of Mao Zedong and Carry the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution Through to the End. On August 8 of the same year, the document passed by the 11th plenary session of the 8th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China was called Decisions of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China on the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, which was changed from the original title The Situation of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution and Certain Issues of the Party's Policies. It has been changed, which shows that the high-level central government has recognized and unified the concept of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Mao Zedong initially wanted to carry out rectification in the cultural field, so it was called the Cultural Revolution, but later it formed a revolution mobilized by the whole society, so it was called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, which will be referred to as Cultural Revolution later. The evolution from the Cultural Revolution to the Cultural Revolution actually reflected the process of Mao Zedong's understanding of this concept. 3. The internal references that Mao Zedong read during the Cultural Revolution can be roughly divided into the following categories. 1 is the internal references to the media, that is, the internal references submitted by the media. The third is departmental internal references, that is, the internal references submitted by various central departments. The fourth is the internal references of the military system, that is, the internal references submitted by the General Office of the Military Commission and various military services, and the fifth is the national economy and people's livelihood information provided through private channels, described below respectively. 1. Media internal reference and its role. The media internal reference mechanism was initiated by Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong himself read all kinds of internal references for a long time, and paid special attention to the internal references submitted by Xinhua News Agency, People's Daily and other media. This long-term working habit continued to be maintained during the Cultural Revolution. Most of the internal references in the media were found by Mao Zedong himself, and a few were forwarded by others. For example, the big character poster What Did Songshuo, Lu Ping, and Pen Piyun Do During the Cultural Revolution, written by 7 people including Nai Yuanzi from Peking University, was posted on the east wall of the dining hall of Peking University on the afternoon of May 25, 1966, and was published in the 13th issue of Cultural Revolution Briefing edited by the editor-in-chief of Red Flag magazine and Guangming Daily on May 27. Kang Sheng immediately submitted the internal reference to Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong commented on June 1, "This article can be broadcast in full by Xinhua News Agency and published in various newspapers and periodicals across the country." The full text was broadcast, and newspapers such as People's Daily and Beijing Daily published it the next day. Mao Zedong wrote his post-reading speech in the blank space of the Beijing Daily on June 2. This is the famous Bombarding the Headquarters, one of my big character posters. Later, Mao Zedong made 2 revisions and added the current title. Mao Zedong regarded Peking University at this time as a reactionary fortress, which may have something to do with an incident not long ago. On May 11 of the same year, Mao Zedong saw a piece of information from unknown sources, namely a material written by Zhang Insi, a former teacher of the philosophy department of Peking University. This material puts forward some sharp opinions on Peking University's Four Cleans Task Force, the Peking University Party Committee and the Beijing Municipal Committee of the Communist Party of China's leadership of Peking University's Four Cleans movement, and Peking University's implementation of educational policies. Mao Zedong changed the title of the material to Comrade Zhang Inxi's opinions on Peking University's Four Clean UPS movement and commented, after reading it, Comrade Shaokai, print and distribute the material to relevant comrades. The NPC poster laid the groundwork. At that time, in order to meet the needs of the situation, Xinhua News Agency specially created publications reflecting the trend of the Cultural Revolution. Xinhua News Agency's internal references were publications that Mao Zedong often read and even must read. The information they submitted was often turned into a huge administrative force due to Mao Zedong's instructions. Many major actions during the Cultural Revolution were triggered by the internal reference of Xinhua News Agency and People's Daily. For example, on May 12, 1968, Xinhua News Agency published a telegram in the special issue of Cultural Revolution Trends published by Xinhua News Agency. Mao Zedong read it on the 19th and commented, Comrade Wen Yuan, it is recommended that this article be distributed nationwide. First print a few copies and distribute it to relevant comrades, then read it once at the meeting, make revisions, and then issue comments. Among the similar materials I have read among them, this one is the best. I have heard about this factory twice from individual comrades. Can you go there and have a look and ask? On the 25th, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China and the Central Cultural Revolution Group will this experience has been forwarded to the whole country, and all localities are referred to it for implementation. Since then, a shocking so-called cleaning up class ranks movement has been launched across the country. By August 24th of the same year, the Xinhua News Agency published Cultural Revolution Trends to issue 1383, and the amount of information submitted was still very large. People's Daily once had an internal reference that also caused a national shock. The 628th issue of Compilation of the Cultural Revolution compiled and printed by the editor-in-chief of People's Daily on September 29, 1968 published an article saying that May 7 this year is the second anniversary of the publication of Chairman Mao's May 7 instructions. Along Jiang Province, the Revolutionary Committee organized a large number of cadres to go to work, set up a farm in Liuhe, Qing'an County, and named it May 7th Cadre School, which paved a new way for the revolutionization of the government and the reform of the superstructure. After Mao Zedong read it, he commented on the second day, Comrade Yao Wen Yuan, this article seems to be published in the People's Daily. The majority of cadres are sent to work. This is an excellent opportunity for cadres to relearn, except for the old, weak, sick, and disabled. 2. The incumbent cadres should also be transferred to work in batches. Please refer to the meeting to discuss and decide on the above. On October 5, the People's Daily published this internal reference and quoted Mao Zedong's comments in the editor's note. Then, many cadre schools have been set up all over the country, causing a sensation in the society. The famous Peking Lun incident was also detonated by Xinhua News Agency's internal reference. Since there have been many articles about it, I won't go into details here. Even though some things seem wrong today, the media must not be blamed and demanded for it. Reporting problems is the bounden duty of the media, and central media such as Xinhua News Agency, People's Daily and Guangming Daily should do so. As for how the issues reflected should be viewed and evaluated, that is the responsibility of the higher authorities, not the media. Of course, it would be irresponsible for the media to report the situation indiscriminately and report information at the grassroots level. The political earthquakes caused by the media's internal reference are also graded, with strong earthquakes, major earthquakes, moderate earthquakes, and small earthquakes. The magnitude of the shaking is different, often related to the special climate conditions of that era. Not every internal reference can play a role. In fact, many internal references in the media disappear silently. The few examples above are nothing more than unavoidable events in the history of the Cultural Revolution. Some media internal references that play the same role can also be cited, but due to space limitations, I will not repeat them here. 2. The internal reference of the Central Cultural Revolution Group and its role. After the establishment of the Central Cultural Revolution Group, various internal references were compiled and printed by its subordinate agencies, offices, and working groups, such as Express, Indian Express, Cultural Revolution Briefing, Important Events Report, and so on. Judging from the materials provided by Mao Zedong's Chronicle, Among the various internal references reviewed and approved by Mao Zedong in the early days of the Cultural Revolution, the internal references submitted by the Central Cultural Revolution Group were the ones he read the most. In April 1969, after the 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, a new Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China was established. The Central Cultural Revolution Group actually ceased to exist, and the internal reference it founded also disappeared. It is still not known when the internal reference organized by the Central Cultural Revolution Group started and ended. However, from the analysis of Mao Zedong's instructions, the most submitted information and the fastest reflection of the situation should be expressed. According to the Chronicle of Mao Zedong, by February 25, 1967, the Central Cultural Revolution Group's working group had compiled and printed Express number 1334. By April 21, it had compiled number 1940. By May 20, it had compiled number 2213. By November 5, it has been compiled to number 5290. By November 13, it has been compiled to number 5414. By November 21st, it has been compiled to number 5510. Based on the number of days and issues, Express compiles and prints more than 15 issues per day on average. In addition to Express, the working group of the Central Cultural Revolution Group also published Cultural Revolution Briefing. By March 26, 1967, it had been compiled to the 435th issue. By May 5, it had been compiled to the 470th issue. Issue 1. It also published an internal reference called Indian Express. By May 21, 1967, it had been compiled to the 131st issue. By June 19, it had been compiled to the 234th issue, with an average of 3.5 issues per day. As for the internal reference called Report on Important Events, I don't know how many issues it has been published. In terms of function, Express and Indian Express mainly reflect information, while Cultural Revolution Briefing and Report on Important Events mainly focus on countermeasures and suggestions. During the Cultural Revolution, there were many chaos and factions. From time to time, various places sent telegrams to the central government, so the Indian Express was born, and the main content of Express was the situation reported by the dispatched reporters. Judging from the Mao Zedong Chronicle, since 1968, the above-mentioned internal references organized by the Central Cultural Revolution Group have disappeared. Was it discontinued, or was the Mao Zedong Chronicle not included? We can't judge. Yang Yinlu's book Diaotai in the Courtyard, I served as Jiang Qing's secretary, said, from 1967 to the first half of 1969, Jiang Qing sent a lot of reference materials to Chairman Mao. Newspapers, including People's Daily, Liberation Daily, Guangming Daily, Reference News, Liberation Army Daily, Wenwei Po, etc. Publications include reference materials, Big Reference, Red Flag, News Situation, etc. The materials include the internal reference group, which reflects the situation learned by the reporter stations in various places, such as the Express, Cultural Revolution Briefing, Important Report of the Cultural Revolution Group Reporter Station, and important information learned by the 2nd and 3rd Departments of the General Staff, important briefings on meetings held by the central government, etc. The book also wrote, before the 9th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, Chairman Mao attached great importance to the materials Jiang Qing sent to him, read every piece, and circled every piece. I don't know why the 9th Congress afterwards, I saw less. When returning it to Jiang Qing, Chairman Mao drew some circles and some did not. After July and August 1969, he basically did not draw circles, and sometimes even the envelopes were not opened. At this time, Jiang Qing felt that it was no longer interesting, so he no longer chose to send it. It is certain that Mao Zedong attached great importance to the information submitted by Jiang Qing in the early days of the Cultural Revolution. It is also certain that Jiang Qing is by no means Mao Zedong's the only information source channel. With Mao Zedong's wisdom, he will definitely set up multiple information reporting channels in order to more comprehensively control the overall situation. Although the average daily output of Express and Indian Express is relatively high, it is hard to say whether Mao Zedong read every article. Those who give instructions are either relatively special circumstances or general problems. For example, on June 21, 1967, Mao Zedong read the article published on the 234th issue of Xindian Express compiled and printed by the Central Cultural Revolution Group Working Group on June 19. After the wasteful masses wrote in, they immediately commented, "Comrades of the Cultural Revolution Group, I suggest that this document be published publicly. Whether it is appropriate or not, please discuss it at the meeting of the Standing Committee. It is better to write a note when publishing." According to Mao Zedong's instructions, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China issued on the 29th of the same month notice concerning thrift and revolution and preventing extravagance and waste, thus stopping this unhealthy trend. 3. Internal references of the Central Office and State Office and their functions. In the later period of the Cultural Revolution, especially after the September 13th incident, Mao Zedong's most read internal references were the summary of important letters and summary of letters compiled and printed by the General Office of the Central Committee. The General Office of the Central Committee is the central organ of the Central Committee, possessing abundant information resources, directly managed by the Director of the Central Office, Wang Dongxin, and is Mao Zedong's trusted information channel. In the early days of the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong also attached great importance to some unique information submitted by the Central Office. For example, the Letters and Calls Office of the Secretariat of the Central Committee published the 280th issue of Cultural Revolution Letters and Calls Briefing compiled and printed on July 4, 1967, and published the article "People all over the country are actively shaping the statue of Chairman Mao." On the 5th, Mao Zedong read it and commented, "Lin Biao, Inlay, and the comrades of the Cultural Revolution Group, this kind of thing is a waste of money and money. It is useless and harmful. If it is not stopped, there will be a wave of exaggeration. Please discuss it at the enlarged meeting of the Politburo Standing Committee and send it out." Instructions to stop it. On the 13th of the same month, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China issued the instructions on the construction of Chairman Mao's statue, which was followed by Mao Zedong's instructions, and Mao Zedong's instructions on July 5 were forwarded to all parts of the country, requiring mass organizations at all levels to strictly enforce the construction. Stop. Interestingly, on June 28 of the same year, Lin Biao instructed the army to build large-scale full-body statues of Chairman Mao extensively. On July 12, Mao Zedong commented on the notice draft submitted by Lin Biao, "Retire Comrade Lin Biao. This document will not be issued. The Central Committee has given instructions." From the beginning of 1972, mainly some old cotters, and a few old experts and scholars, such as Lise Warren, the former deputy director of the Central Propaganda Department, Wu Lengzi, the president of the People's Daily, Su Jianhua, the political commissar of the Navy, and Yang Junzhong, the daughter of Yang Qinghua, began to use various channels. Write a letter to Mao Zedong to reflect his own situation and request to solve the problem. Mao Zedong gave instructions. For example, to Wu Lengzi's letter on December 16, 1971, he wrote on January 29, 1972, "This document has been read. Welcome to progress. Deposit it in People's Daily." To Su Jianhua's letter on December 13, 1971, in 1972 instructions on March 5, "This person seems to be liberated. If the Navy can't use him, it seems that he can be transferred back to the Army, or in a local area, and let him do some work. Whether it is possible or not, it is up to the central government to decide. Please Wang Yinfa to all comrades." The internal staff of the General Office of the Central Committee also made active efforts to liberate and return veteran cotters. For example, on May 27, 1972, the Letters and Visits Department of the Central General Office published a letter to Mao Zedong from Bai Qigong, the son of Bai Jian, the former Vice Minister of the Ministry of Machinery, which Mao Zedong read on May 31. Instructions: send it to the Prime Minister for reading. Bai Jian is good in my impression, and political conclusions should be made for him. It is impossible to verify when the excerpts of important letters was established as an internal reference of the Central Office. The Mao Zedong Chronicle once revealed that on November 14, 1968, the Letters and Calls Office of the Secretariat of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China submitted the excerpt of important letters number 408 to Mao Zedong for review and approval. It can be seen that this kind of internal reference already existed in 1968. Judging from the number, it is estimated that there is a start and end number every year. By December 22, 1972, the letter digest had been compiled to number 316, and it was published almost once a day. The total volume may be slightly less than that of the whole year of 1968. Since it is a required letter, it proves that the identity of the letter is not low, otherwise it will not be reported and reflected. The General Office of the Central Committee also established an internal reference with functions similar to the excerpts of letters, called Summary of Letters. For example, on July 7, 1972, the letter summary number 465, 1972, compiled and printed by the Letters and Visits Office of the Central Office, published a letter from Liao Hanzhen's children reflecting his family's situation. After reading it, Mao Zedong commented, "Send it to the premier for reading. I see Liao Hanzheng like Yang Yang, he is innocent," and was ordered by Lin Biao to rectify without discussion by the central government. After you read this, please hand it over to Jianying and Deshen. At the end of the second year, Liao Hanzheng was appointed as the political commissar. By December 2, 1972, the letter summary had been compiled to number 858, with an average of more than 70 issues per month. On January 6, 1973, the digest of letters was compiled to number 27 of 1973. In just 6 days of the first year, 27 issues of letters were compiled and printed. It can be seen that the information reflected in the digest of letters is more than that of digest of important letters. Several times more. Most of the letters published in the letter summary are letters from the family members of veteran cadres and relatives who are not very high-ranking. Judging from the Mao Zedong Chronicle, Mao Zedong made more than 10 comments in the excerpts of important letters and summaries of letters. This played a great role in promoting the comeback and liberation of veteran cadres at that time. Like the General Office of the Central Committee, the General Office of the State Council, which is the central organ of the State Council system, also has internal references that reflect various information. For example, on January 11, 1969, the People's Letters excerpt published by the Letters and Calls Office of the Secretary Office of the State Council published a letter suggesting that Zhang Qing should become a member of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee and hoped that she would concurrently serve as head of the Organization Department of the Central Committee. On the 17th, Zhou Enlai submitted this internal reference to Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong commented, "It is inappropriate to have a false name. Also, Li Na and Mao Yuengzin are not suitable to be representatives represent." In addition to some old comrades mentioned above, there are also some old comrades who directly wrote to Mao Zedong to report problems. Perhaps for some old comrades, it is better and faster to write directly to Mao Zedong than to use the channels of the Central Office's internal reference extracts of important letters and summaries of letters. For example, Chen Yun sent a letter to Mao Zedong on July 21, 1972, requesting the central government to allocate work within its capacity, hoping to participate in the study class for old comrades in Beijing, and asking whether he could make an exception and give him an official car with heating, so as to facilitate field research in spring and autumn inspection etc. The next day, Mao Zedong issued an order, print and distribute. Please agree with the central government. I think everything can be agreed. Please ask the Prime Minister to do it. Soon, Chen Yun came out again to assist Premier Zhou in his work, and at the same time participated in the study class for old comrades in Beijing. Who are the old comrades participating in this study class, what is the nature of the class, and when did it start and end? It is still an unsolved mystery. There are also letters written by some old comrades to Mao Zedong who were forwarded to Mao Zedong. For example, Lu Shuqing, wife of Vice Minister of Railways Lu Jianzhang, entrusted Wang Herong and Tang Wenzheng to forward them, asking Zhang Qing to forward it is all pleading to improve the status quo, hoping that the organization will draw conclusions, reschedule work, and so on. In short, in the 2 years of 1972 and 1973, Mao Zedong liberated and reappointed a large number of veteran cadres and comrades through and using internal reference channels, and some of them quickly entrusted them with important tasks. For example, not long after Sijinhua returned to work, he participated in the preparations for the 4th National People's Congress that began in September 1973. In addition to the Letters and Calls Office of the Secretariat Bureau of the Central Office compiled and printed the Cultural Revolution Letters and Visits Briefing, excerpts of important letters and summary of letters, the Subordinate Confidential Office also compiled and printed summary of documents and telegrams, and the Secretary Office edited and printed summary of letters and calls. Mao Zedong also read and commented on the internal references of different channels and platforms, such as Mass Response, situation briefing, and some of these internal references have become historical documents and have high research value. 4. Military system internal references and their functions. According to the needs of the situation at that time, the military system established the All-Army Cultural Revolution Group, and correspondingly established an internal reference mechanism to reflect military problems. For example, on January 25, 1967, the Military Cultural Revolution Group compiled and printed number 5 of the Military Cultural Revolution Movement Situation Report, which reflected the situation of some units in the army that had been seized power, and raised some issues that needed attention. Mao Zedong saw this internal reference the next day, and immediately commented, "Comrade Lin Biao, this document reflects the masses' proposals as to which organs can seize power and which cannot. The majority cannot be excluded. Please study it." According to Mao Zedong's thought that the army cannot be chaotic, on February 16 of the same year, the Central Military Commission issued the regulations on the scope of the army's seizure of power. This regulation has played a positive role in stabilizing the military and the development and production of cutting-edge weapons. On March 2 of the same year, number 17 of the Report on the Military Cultural Revolution Movement compiled and printed by the Cultural Revolution Group of the whole Army contained materials on the work experience of the Guizhou Provincial Military Region in supporting the leftists. After Mao Zedong read this internal reference, he commented on March 7, "Comrade Chi Binayu, I have read this document, and it is good. However, some problems are not written specifically. For example, the first problem does not have an example. How to solve it is unclear. Please decide whether to ask them to write a more specific report that can be published." Mao Zedong wanted to revise and sort out this good internal reference for public release. However, judging from the numbers from the 5th issue to the 17th issue, only 13 issues were published in more than a month, indicating that the editors are not very motivated, or there is not much information to reflect. Like the General Office of the Central Committee and the General Office of the State Council, the General Office of the Central Military Commission also compiles and prints internal references reflecting social issues. For example, on July 4, 1967, excerpts from Letters from the Masses number 55 compiled and printed by the General Office of the Central Military Commission reflected the severe fighting in Ganzhou, the heavy casualties, food and water shortages, and traffic jams. Ganzhou is the place where Mao Zedong fought in the Central Soviet area. For him, Ganzhou is a very familiar symbol. After Mao Zedong read this internal reference, he gave instructions on the 6th, "Lin Biao, comrades in Wei, the problem in Ganzhou is serious, involving more than 10 counties in southern Jiangxi. If one division is transferred, it can only manage Nanchang, Jian, Yushan, Fuzhou, and other places. It is too late for the southern whip. Whether it is possible to transfer a division and at least one regiment from the Guangzhou military region to Ganzhou, and return to Guangdong after the matter is settled. Please consider this matter first and discuss it in person." The working group of the Central Military Commission was once the institution with the greatest power and the highest status in the military system during the Cultural Revolution. According to political logic, the working group of the Military Commission must also conduct internal reference. For example, on November 13, 1968, the working group of the Military Commission submitted a briefing report to Mao Zedong, reflecting the serious political incidents of the People's Liberation Army's 5th Company when it confiscated the weapons of the local rebels, and shot and wounded the masses. Carefully check the situation. Mao Zedong saw this internal reference the next day, and commented, "Army leaders do not cover up the bad things done by the troops and avenge the victims. This attitude is a manifestation of the country's prosperity." Before that, on August 28, Mao Zedong saw an excerpt from letters and visits submitted by the working group of the Military Commission stated that mass organizations in Guizhou in Yunnan, Niajiang in Sichuan, and Beijing in Hebei held talks and symposiums with the local garrisons. The army took the initiative to check the shortcomings in the work of the 3 supports and 2 armies and some wrong attitudes towards the masses, and sincerely apologized to the masses. As a result, the 2 sides further strengthened the military-civilian relationship and strengthened the military-civilian unity. After reading it, Mao Zedong issued an instruction on September 4. It is recommended that this document be notified to the entire army, and a general heart-to-heart meeting be held. On October 4 of the same year, the Central Military Commission and the Central Cultural Revolution Group issued Mao Zedong's instruction and this internal reference to the entire army. As for the role of internal references run by the PLA Daily, the most authoritative media in the military, I won't go into details here. 5. Departmental internal references and their functions. China's internal reference mechanism is a huge system, which extends from top to bottom to various departments under the central government, and each department also reports the internal reference information it holds from bottom to top, so that the highest level can develop from a point to a comprehensive level. Deal with global and universal problems. For example, on September 8, 1966, the 9th issue of the Briefing on Foreign-Related Issues during the Cultural Revolution, compiled and printed by the Secretary Group of the Foreign Affairs Office of the State Council, contained a letter from an Austrian criticizing the clothing and the car is too high-end and luxurious, and it is hoped that the Chinese side will immediately take measures to correct it. The next day, Mao Zedong issued an instruction on this internal reference: retire Comrade Chen Yi. This critical document is well written and deserves the attention of all agencies stationed abroad. It will be a revolution, otherwise it will be very dangerous. You can start with Vienna. Please decide. The 29th issue of the Briefing on Foreign Affairs Activities, compiled and printed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, published some opinions of Garcia, charge d'affaires ad interim of the Cuban embassy in China, after visiting Yan'an, Nanchang, Jinggangshan and other places. Zhou Enlai submitted this internal reference to Mao Zedong on February 18, 1971. After reading it, Mao Zedong commented, "The fourth article is correct, and it should be correctly explained in response to the Nanchang uprising and the cooperation between the two armies. For the founder and leader Zhou Enlai, it is a great support." On March 10 of the same year, issue 108 of the Briefing on Sino-Soviet Boundary Negotiations published the relevant information and suggestions of the 16th plenary meeting of the Sino-Soviet Boundary Negotiations. After reading it, Mao Zedong commented, "I agree. You must not fall into the trap of the other side." The political work group of the Department of Philosophy and Social Sciences of the Chinese Academy of Sciences published a manuscript in the 31st issue of Politics Briefing, compiled and printed on October 9, 1975, reflecting the feelings of old intellectuals such as Fengji, Ren Jiyu, Yan Zhongping, and He Kifang attending the 26th National Day reception. Excited. Hu Qiaomu read it on October 13 and forwarded it to Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping reported it to Mao Zedong on the 15th. After reading it, Mao Zedong commented on this internal reference on the 16th, "Break the metaphysics of gold must be pure and people must be perfect. Wrong thinking. It is a pity that Zhou Yang and Liang Shuming were not invited." Soon, Mao Zedong's instructions were spread to the society, which greatly encouraged the intellectual circles at that time. The internal references reported by some departments inadvertently published news that contradicted Mao Zedong's views, and Mao Zedong treated it calmly after reading it. On November 25, 1967, the International Liaison Department of the Central Committee submitted an internal reference, which reflected the opinions of three people, including Anzei Koji, editor of the Japanese leftist theoretical publication Revolutionary Warrior, and believed that the various hints of the Chinese comrades that Japan should take the road of encircling the cities from the countryside were contrary to the Mao Zedong thought, overemphasizing the universal significance of the road of encircling cities from rural areas in China is actually negating the road of the October Revolution from cities to rural areas. It cannot be said that the road of the October Revolution has only special significance. Unexpectedly, Mao Zedong read this point of view, which clearly opposed Mao Zedong's classic theory. After reading it on the 27th, Mao Zedong commented, "Comrade Kang Shen, this issue deserves attention. I think Anzai's opinion is correct. Let me know what you think." 12 On January 1, in response to a question raised by Yao Wenyuan on this article, Mao Zedong once again commented, "I think the opinions of comrades such as Anzai are correct. My exposition of the tasks of the proletarian parties in capitalist countries in 1938, it is still valid." Mao Zedong understood and supported foreign leftists who did not agree with his views, which is a manifestation of political enlightenment and broad-mindedness of great politicians and thinkers. 4. According to the author's rough statistics on Mao Zedong's manuscripts since the founding of the People's Republic of China and Mao Zedong Chronicle, there are more than 120 internal reference articles that Mao Zedong has read and approved, and the internal reference articles illustrated in this article are only a small part of them. The number of articles here is published, and there must be unpublished ones, and the number of unpublished articles may greatly exceed the number of published ones. In the memoirs of some veteran journalists, veteran cadres, and veteran comrades, Mao Zedong's internal reference instructions were revealed, and none of them were included in authoritative publications. It should be said that almost every piece of Mao Zedong's internal reference instructions has its own characteristics, and every piece reflects his thoughts and strategies on governing the country. In this regard, we can make the following judgments. First, the shape of the internal reference can be stable or unstable. Most of the internal references of the media and party and government agencies are stable, while a few are unstable. For example, the forms of internal references such as Xinhua news agency's internal reference and domestic dynamic proof are stable and have continued to this day, while the Cultural Revolution dynamics and the internal reference is unstable, and when the political wind changes, this type of internal reference will disappear. Another situation is that the institutions established due to the needs of the situation will inevitably be abolished as the situation does not need it, and the internal references established by such institutions will also disappear accordingly. For example, after the Central Cultural Revolution Group was abolished, various prominent internal references such as Express, Report on Important Events, and Zindian Express founded by it also withdrew from the stage of history. Whether stable or unstable, internal references have played their own role, big or small, bad or good. Second, Mao Zedong's internal reference instructions are an important part of Mao Zedong thought and an important aspect of studying the formation process of Mao Zedong thought. Without studying Mao Zedong's internal reference instructions, it is certainly impossible to fully and deeply understand and grasp Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution thinking, and it is impossible to obtain correct conclusions. For example, where did he go wrong? Where does the wrong information come from? Etc. Third, the internal references to the Cultural Revolution reviewed and approved by Mao Zedong revealed some of Mao Zedong's true thoughts on high-level personnel affairs. Some of Mao Zedong's internal reference instructions were very concise, such as phrases such as agree and please use discretion. Some wrote several sentences, and even showed some sincere concern. For example, in Fu Lianyun's letter, Mao Zedong instructed him to analyze his own life, and don't only see the advantages but not the shortcomings. Fu Lianyun once saved Mao Zedong's life, so Mao Zedong was free to talk to him. Regarding General Mo Wenhua's letter, Mao Zedong said in his instructions, Mo Wenhua does not seem to be a bad person. Because he can't unite people, he offended many people. It seems that Mao Zedong knew Mo Wenhua very well, even his character traits. In the report on important events compiled and printed by the Central Cultural Revolution Group Working Group on May 26, 1967, it was reported that 17 Red Guards ransacked the home of Wang Shaiyan, the vice-governor of Yunnan province, and confiscated watches, cameras, cash, passbooks, etc., was caught while withdrawing money from the bank. It was verified that except for 2 people, the rest were all the children of high-ranking cadres. After reading it, Mao Zedong commented, if it is not educated well, it will become one of the bane of counter-revolutionary restoration in the future. Fortunately, it does not account for the majority of cadres' children, and the majority is better. From this we can see Mao Zedong's impression of some cadres' children, not too good. Luo Ruqing wrote a 78-page letter to Mao Zedong in December 1974. Mao Zedong had problems with his eyesight at that time, so he had to ask the staff to read it to him. It took 5.5 hours. It can be seen that Mao Zedong had deep affection for Luo Ruqing. For some intellectuals who love the party and the country, Mao Zedong always maintained due respect and courtesy. Professor Liu Daja of Fudan University wrote a letter to Mao Zedong on August 3, 1975, and the Office of Letters and Visits of the Central Office published it in the letter summary number 540 on August 7 until February 12, 1976, 6 months later. Mao Zedong then commented, I agree with your opinion on Hanyu. It is better to divide one into 2. Li Yixin's untitled poem is difficult to judge now, and it is temporarily doubtful. Thank you. From this last comment of Mao Zedong's internal reference, it can be seen that although Mao Zedong was unable to reply to the letter due to eye disease at the time, he always remembered this matter. The dialogue between him and Liu Daja was an equal academic exchange between 2 literati. Mao Zedong had no airs of superiority at all, and was very polite to Liu Daja, which truly and fully reflected Mao Zedong's consistent charisma as a leader in his later years. Fourth, the major events during the Cultural Revolution were almost all related to internal references, and some were even triggered by internal references. Such as the Fengqinglun incident of the Ministry of Communications, the New Situation Controversy incident of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and so on. The internal reference is also a stage for the expression of various political forces during the Cultural Revolution, a platform for the confrontation of various viewpoints, and a channel used by various political figures. Its story is strong. and its conflict is sometimes strong. The natural confidentiality of the internal reference makes us still feel confused about some major events that occurred during the Cultural Revolution period. This is a pity.